Thank you for standing by, and welcome to the Paradigm Biopharmaceuticals Investor Conference Call. I'd now like to hand the conference over to Mr. Paul Rennie, CEO. Please go ahead, Paul.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending. And I'd also like to make a special note of thanks to our investors from Asia and also the United States who've dialed into the call this morning. The purpose of the call is to really inform everybody of a large amount of information that we've released in the last few days. We've had quite a number of ASX announcements in relation to the trading halt, and then information in relation to the minutes of the FDA meeting, and then we had the minutes or an update in terms of the very exciting new data that we have from 34 special access cases and so on. And today we'll be making an announcement around the conclusion of the capital raise. So a lot of information has gone out, and I just really wanted to try and walk everyone through the key aspects of all of that. Before I get into the presentation, I'd just like to remind everybody that treatment of osteoarthritis is Paradigm's lead clinical development program. We've been working on this program now for a number of years. And again, just to remind everyone, osteoarthritis is a huge commercial market opportunity. And we also know that osteoarthritis is an indication that has a very significant unmet medical need. Most of the products that are prescribed to patients with osteoarthritis provide symptomatic relief, but as the disease progresses to end stage, those therapies are really no longer effective. So we have a large amount of people out in the community who are struggling with the disease. It's a huge cost to the healthcare system, and Paradigm is very excited about what we have to deliver in terms of a potential new product for this very massive, and I should say rapidly expanding market. Now, in terms of going forward, we're very excited with our meeting with the FDA. So I'll start there with some of the outcomes of that meeting. And you may ask, well, why would you be so excited from this meeting with the FDA? Well, in terms of pharmaceutical and clinical development, it's a very complex business, and for any pharma company to have clarity and certainty around the future is absolute gold. It is what we seek to try and get the product to market. There are many moving parts in this industry, and with each program there are many challenges, there's many questions, there's many variables, but to finally get to a point with an agency such as the US FDA and have this clarity and certainty, Paradigm is absolutely delighted. We know what we need to do, and now it's a question of having the right staff in place to execute and deliver on those directions from the agency, and we believe that we're very well positioned to do that. We have 4 staff in the United States, all highly experienced people in their different specialities, but in terms of our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Donna Skerritt, she's been involved in probably between 20 and 30 meetings with the agency, and she considered this meeting that we had with the FDA one of the best meetings that she could remember. We also have on our consulting staff Professor David Felsen, who has attended many meetings with the US FDA, often as an advisor with the FDA, looking and inquiring and making specific scientific and medical judgments about other clinical development programs, and he believed this was probably the best meeting that he had been to with the FDA. And so on. We had many experienced people there, all very excited with the outcome of the meeting. Rarely is it seen that you get such definitive and clear outcomes. So in terms of the FDA meeting, it generally is broken into 3 sections. There's a section where the agency can ask questions in relation to the clinical data presented from the sponsor. So Paradigm presented all of its data from its number of clinical trials in the musculoskeletal space, in particular our phase 2B clinical study and we presented the full clinical study report to the agency. The second area of questioning is in relation to the CMC section, or the manufacturing of the API, and also the manufacturing of the finished product, which is the sterile solution for injection. And then thirdly, there's an opportunity for the sponsor to ask questions from the agency, specific questions in relation to the clinical study design, and all of the questions that we need answered to be able to give us the clarity to move forward very confidently with a program that is likely to reach phase 3 success. So in terms of the questions in relation to the phase 2 clinical trial data, there were very few, which is a very positive sign that the safety and efficacy of the product was well established. In relation to the manufacturing of the API, Paradigm obviously pointed to the drug master file, which the agency has, and there were no questions in relation to the BeNA API. Additionally, there were no real questions in relation to the manufactured product, the final product. That has all been done to GMP standards with a recognised facility that does have an FDA accreditation and also manufactures many products for the US. So we had some specific questions in relation to our proposed phase 3 clinical trial design. In terms of the outcomes, I'm looking at a slide which is on the Paradigm website now, which is our updated corporate presentation, and there may be some people who are looking at that presentation as well as we speak. And I'm looking at slide 4, and on that particular slide, this is a summary of the FDA meeting for our proposed phase 3 OA clinical trial. And the positive outcomes from the meeting can be summarised firstly as we got clarity that the endpoints that Paradigm used in our phase 2B trial are definitely suitable endpoints for the phase 3 clinical trial. Now, again, that is gold. Knowing that we know what the endpoints will be, we can then look at our phase 2 data and establish that we've already proved that in a sample size of 112 subjects versus placebo, and we'll be moving forward very confidently knowing that the drug under those conditions of the treatment cycle, etc., does produce an outcome which is achievable. So we're very delighted with that. We also had some discussion around the active ingredient itself, pentazan polysulfate from BeNA Pharma. And I think it's very interesting because there are some people who often ask about the intellectual property position. And just as an aside, for people who may or may not know, our patents are granted in the major markets of the US, Japan, China, Europe, and of course Australia. Patents are granted, which means they have gone through the examination process by the various patent offices, and they've been determined to be novel invention and also involve an inventive step. So that means those patents are on foot in those jurisdictions. But in terms of additional protection, we were talking to the agency, and this is our notes from the meeting saying that the FDA acknowledged other PPS manufacturers or other PPS from different manufacturers can have a different range of moieties and molecular weight, and Paradigm's product needs to be identical in both structure and purity and traceable back to the BeNA PPS material. And so that is important to support both the IND and the NDA, which is the submission after the phase 3 studies are finished, which is the submission for registration. And so we have to provide back to the agency the certificate of analysis of each batch that we've used, the GPC trace, which shows the range of moieties and molecular weights within the PPS molecule. There is a description in our presentation of what a moiety is, but just very briefly, it's a separate chemical structure within the overall structure of the PPS molecule. And there are a number of these moieties within PPS. And we have to show a GP trace, which is a chromatogram which shows the various concentrations of all of the components of the PPS molecule. And Rennie produced the PPS batch after batch after batch with continual same concentrations of the GPC trace. Molecular weight, the product specifications, and also the final release data from the finished product. So in terms of just discussing the point of generic competition, it's important to note that there is no generic PPS on the market in the United States. And we think now we know why, because other manufacturers will have these different moieties and different molecular weights, and these all talk to different products in terms of the safety and the efficacy of the PPS molecule. So therefore, by selecting the Rennie material years ago as our preferred PPS material to repurpose, we have had now a very significant breakthrough in terms of understanding how difficult it would be for a company to bring a PPS product, as some people might say, as a potential generic to the agency, and the barrier to that entry for that particular material would be incredibly difficult, because it has to show, as Paradigm is been asked, identical in both structure and purity and traceability back to a Rennie product. So it's almost locking the door on any other PPS type materials in the United States. And we think that this gives Paradigm probably somewhere in the region of 10 to 15 years of little competition in the United States market. So if people are writing about generic PPS, then clearly we look to the US and see that there has been PPS on the market in an oral form, which was patented by Janssen, a division of Johnson & Johnson, many years ago, and that patent expired in 2010. And since that time, there has been no generic oral product on the market in the United States, despite the fact that Janssen's prices and sales have pretty much skyrocketed over the last 10 years, just when you expect generic competition to come in and try and take a piece of that $200 million a year market. So we're very, very confident with that discussion that we had with the agency around the uniqueness and the specificity of the Rennie material. As I mentioned earlier, we have great clarity now around the primary and secondary endpoints, and just from our point of view, to know what they are is very important, but to know that they are the same primary endpoints that we had in our phase 2 trial, which is reduction in pain from baseline, improvement in function, and also the other primary and secondary endpoints such as the bone marrow lesion, volume, area and grade, as well as the biomarkers. It's effectively a phase 2 trial on larger numbers. So we're very excited about the clarity, and also to know that our drug works under those circumstances. We go into the phase 3 trial with a lot of confidence. So in terms of one of the other questions that was discussed with the agency was the duration of effect. So we spoke to the agency around the durability of response. In fact, they noted that the durability of the drug produced a clinically meaningful and statistically significant result over placebo at day 165. And they asked the question, how long do we think that effect lasts? Because that is a very good duration for a therapeutic product, particularly in people with osteoarthritis. And we pointed to our real-world evidence and said that we had evidence to suggest that the drug had a durability of 12 months or more. And the agency suggested not for an endpoint, not for any type of issue in relation to the phase 3, but beyond the phase 3, when we're looking at a label, we may want to know and have data on file with the agency to point to the durability of effect. So if we want to have a label which says this drug is for the treatment of osteoarthritis pain and should be re-administered every 12 months, then the agency suggested we would be well advised to have that durability data on file. Now, it's not a requirement to make the trial successful or not. I just need to clarify that. But what it means is for future filings for label and also reimbursement, the agency suggested we look at that as part of our trial design and come up with a period of time that we believe the product will still have the effect and test it to that. But as I say, that's for information over and above a phase 3 trial. The primary and secondary endpoints of the trial are what will make the trial successful or not the durability. The durability is an issue which is later once the product is being sold in terms of the label or in relation to demonstrating to practitioners who may want to use the product in terms of usage guidelines what the normal retreatment cycle would roughly be in humans. So I hope that point is clear. We are studying the durability of effect, but it is not an endpoint. It's for matters beyond the clinical trial. The endpoints are reduction in pain from baseline at a predetermined time point, which will be day 53. And if we show that we have a result that is clinically meaningful and statistically significant at that point, the trial is successful. The secondary endpoints then support the primary endpoint, but that's how the trial will be deemed successful or not durability. Durability was noted as being exceptionally good, but for further use of the label, promotions with practitioners, etc., having the durability of effect as part of a phase 3 trial would be a very important recommendation from the agency. So we've taken that on board. As I've mentioned in a number of presentations, the number of subjects we were originally aiming to treat under the phase 3 trial was 600. The agency and Paradigm had a discussion around phase 3 trial being around about 750 patients and the confirmatory study being around 400 patients. I'll come on to those details a little bit later and just explain the rationale behind that. But again, it's very clear and we fully understand the agency's position in that regard. Now, what I'd like to do is also answer, I've got a list of questions which have been sent through, so thanks to everyone who's taken the time to write a question in. One of the questions that I have is there any data to suggest what the phase 3 results may look like? So in this case, I'm moving in terms of this presentation to a slide 6, which refers to 34 subjects who have been treated under the Special Access Scheme by their doctor. Now, just to remind everyone, to be eligible for the Special Access Scheme, the doctor needs to advise the agency, the TGA, that the patient has failed all standards of care. So all therapeutic options have been exhausted and the patient is still in significant pain and discomfort, and the doctor and patient agree they want to try the drug under those settings. So these are the people that will be very similar to the people in our phase 3 clinical trials in the US. They will be people with what is known as Kellgren-Lawrence grade 2, 3 or 4. That's a scale system used to classify someone's stage of osteoarthritis. So Kellgren-Lawrence 2, 3 and 4 captures people in the moderate to severe osteoarthritis category. And so we're using in these 34 patients people who would normally be included in a phase 3 clinical trial that meet the inclusion criteria. Now, we're also using in these 34 subjects material that was identical. It's the same batch of PPS in solution that we're going to be using in our phase 3 clinical trial. So we've got the same patient type, we've got the same batch of PPS being used, and also we're measuring their pain according to the primary endpoint pain questionnaire, which is WOMAC. And we've had some discussions that originally in our phase 2 trial we used Coues pain on the advice of our consultants, and Coues pain contains the WOMAC questionnaire. So after the study we can pull out the results according to WOMAC, and we've done that, and we showed that we had very strong drug effect size in the WOMAC questionnaire subjects. We also had a very tight set of data around the mean, all of the things that we'd be looking for. So we decided that we would use the WOMAC pain questionnaire in our phase 3 trial, just noting that the Coues pain score was still effective, and we did get a lot of information over and above the WOMAC pain questionnaire from Coues, so we believe the advice from our experts was absolutely correct. But going forward, we're looking at using the WOMAC pain questionnaire. So we're using the same type of patient, we're using the same batch of material, and we're also using the same primary endpoint being WOMAC pain. So in terms of the way the data is being presented, and this was also the subject of a ASX announcement, was the new data from 34 special access patients. And what we did, knowing that we were going to use WOMAC pain questionnaires, we advised all of the sites around Australia that are treating patients under the special access scheme that we want them to now do the clinical assessment according to the WOMAC pain questionnaire. So those sites were trained, taken through the WOMAC questionnaire, and they have now been reporting data. The data goes to our CRO, and the CRO sends it to their biostatistician, who puts all of the information into their database, which is a compliant database with the FDA's recommendation, and the biostatisticians run the numbers. So this is not internally generated data in terms of internal to Paradigm, but it is via our contract research organisation, and they then provided us with the mean of the 5 subscale questions within WOMAC. So WOMAC consists of 5 questions: pain on walking, pain going up and down stairs, pain at night, pain sitting, and pain standing upright. So they're the 5 subscale questions, and they total up to give a total of a WOMAC pain subscale. We measure their pain on the WOMAC scheme before they get the drug and then after they've had the drug. And what we see is the mean results that are charted out on this particular chart, and our biostatistician was very impressed, given the very small sample size of 34 subjects, asked us to stress that the spread, which is seen in the brackets below the mean score, that's 95% confidence interval, and that range is very tight around the mean, and you'll see at all time points there's no crossing over from the range of the before drug WOMAC scores to the after drug WOMAC scores, indicating that this is going to read out in a statistically significant manner. So very, very tight numbers around the mean, very, very good result, one that takes care of the question that has come through in terms of any potential to get an idea of what the phase 3 results might look like. So we have a lot of information around WOMAC and the data that is generated. And also I should say that our chief scientist is now on the second draft of a publication which will present the pain scores from our phase 2b trial, both in COOS and in WOMAC, and make all this information publicly available. But the peer-reviewed publication process does take months. It's not something that can be done within a few weeks. It has to go off for review and then peer review, critical commentary, any questions or clarifications back and forward, and then the editor finally determines the release date of the publication. But all that information is coming, so people will see how the drug performed, the drug effect size, and we should also note that our biostatistician has highlighted that the drug effect size of benzene polysulfate in this type of population is at the high end of drug effect sizes for people with osteoarthritis. So I won't give the actual numbers away, that can wait for the publication, but you'll see in the publication that there are comparators in terms of drug effect size to other drugs. So you'll see that this particular drug has a very, very positive drug effect size. Now, that answers the question in relation to how this might read out in terms of a phase 3. The overall net result in terms of WOMAC shows a net reduction from baseline, so from the pre-drug score to the post-drug score, of minus 45%. Now, the next slide in the presentation and also in our ASX announcement, we drew the comparison trying to find a like-for-like type of study. And we referred to the paper from Fishman et al., which was an efficacy and safety of 12 weeks of osteoarthritic pain being treated with the therapy of an opioid-based analgesic tramadol once a day for 12 weeks. And what we found from that comparison, so they're using similar patients with Kellgren Lawrence 2 to 4. They're using WOMAC as the pain scoring system, but in this case they're using an opioid-based analgesic. But the high dose, 300 milligrams of tramadol once a day for 12 weeks, showed a reduction of 46% compared to Paradigm's PPS at 45% reduction, and the low dose tramadol showed a 43% reduction versus Paradigm's 45% reduction. So we're in the same ballpark as an opioid, but in this case, one very important difference is that the opioid is taken once a day for every day of the 12 weeks. So the final score is still taken with the opioid present in the patient's system. In relation to PPS, we did this scoring system at 12 weeks, so we could draw a very important point out. In terms of PPS, the patients are treated for 6 weeks. So they're treated with the drug twice a week for 6 weeks. And therefore they have no drug in their system for 6 weeks. And yet at week 12, our drug is performing the same or better than the tramadol low dose. So compared to tramadol, which is a tablet that's being taken on the last day of the study prior to their assessment, versus PPS, which has not been in the patient system for 6 weeks, again gives a very clear idea of the durability of this drug, and to still be able to be comparable to an opioid that's being taken on the day is a very, very significant point in terms of how this drug is performing. So that is the basis to the ASX announcement that was released about this new data. And again, I would compel everyone to read that announcement. It goes into great detail in terms of how the study was done and et cetera, et cetera. It's not a clinical trial. We understand that. These are patients who have failed a standard of care. they've been treated with the drug, and yet that's the result of the drug in those patients. And further on from that very, very positive result, we also presented data which is collecting the patient global impression of change. Now, patient global impression of change is becoming a very important measurement for doctors to be able to say, from the patient's point of view, did the treatment really produce any noticeable change for the patient? And this is very important in terms of marketing the drug post-registration, to be able to show doctors that patients had a genuine overall impression that the drug was working and providing them with relief of their main symptoms. And of course, this would then help with penetration rates and uptake by doctors prescribing the product, etc. But in terms of the Pgic scores, you'll see that there's a series of questions, and then the subjects rate those questions. For example, first question, just to rate where you see your condition after you've taken the drug. So no change or condition got worse. We had 0 responders there. And then we had a little better but no noticeable change. We had 2 respondents in that category. However, around 85.7%, 30 out of 34 subjects said they had reported a global impression of change in the categories of noticeable change all the way through to considerable improvement that's made all of the difference for the patient. So these are very, very strong data, again, pointing to what could happen in the phase 3 trial, because Pgic was a secondary endpoint in our phase 2 trial, and it was highly significant in our phase 2 trial over placebo, giving a Pgic score which was statistically significant at 0.0069. So highly significant result on Pgic, and we're seeing the same trend here that patients generally believe, and in this case, patients who have failed all standards of care are now saying this drug has made a great deal better and a considerable improvement that has made all the difference for me. The highest rating of response was better and definite improvement that's made a real and worthwhile difference. So these, again, people who failed all standards of care, who failed all of the other therapies on the market, and they're saying after treatment with Pentazan, this is their outcome. Very, very impressive data. So I'm also just looking through some of the questions as we go. That was one question. I've still got to come back to the point about the drug registration, 2 phase 3 trials, and trial costs, etc. Fda exclusivity, I've touched on that. That agreement provides Paradigm with a 20-year exclusive agreement with Fda Pharma and the supply of the API product with a 10-year extension. So that agreement is absolutely key for Paradigm going forward, knowing that we control the source that the agency will refer all other products to. That's critical for us. There was a question about WOMAC and discussing that as an endpoint, and I think we've covered that in some detail. Now, what I'd like to do is move on to one of the other important aspects of the presentation in terms of upcoming milestones and news flow. So just working through what is coming later this year, calendar year 2020. So as everyone I think knows, we were very fortunate to again submit our safety and efficacy data from our phase 2 trial to the US FDA as part of a demonstration of the safety and effect of the product for use under a compassionate use program, or known in the United States as the expanded label access. So the expanded label access program, or EAP, was approved, and we've now dosed all of the 10 subjects that are in that particular turns out all 10 of these subjects are ex-NFL footballers who all have significant clinical issues surrounding osteoarthritis as a result of probably injuries and years of training. And we've done both the WOMAC scores and the Pgic scores in the follow-ups of these subjects. And we will have those results released Q3 calendar year 2020. My colleague Mitch Marrow from the US has done a great job. Mitch himself is an ex-NFL player, so he knows about all of these issues in relation to life after a professional football career in terms of the effect it has on one's body. And he has spoken to a lot of the colleagues, ex-NFL players, and they have all responded extremely well. So we're looking forward to having some very good announcements around that whole program. Also to let you know that we have a lady from the NFL, Past Players Association, on site, and she has been an active part of the program. She's been monitoring everything along the way, documenting things, and has offered the NFL's assistance in helping with promotion of this particular program within the NFL. And that lady's Carla, who's done a fantastic job in terms of making sure that all of the ex-NFL players turn up on time for their treatments and things like that. So that's a very exciting program. Obviously, it goes without saying that any successful program within the NFL has a high amount of publicity potential, has a high amount of interest in the general population, and I think that's going to drive huge interest amongst the people involved in sport are going to see that this is a real breakthrough. As I mentioned, also looking at this calendar year 2020, pivotal phase 3, we've had our R&D meeting. I've taken everyone through the majority of the points that we had from the FDA meeting. Bear in mind that we did include everything from that meeting, and I want to come back to a question in relation to one of the questions here in terms of the additional toxicology, and just clarify that for everybody. It's not additional toxicology. Let me say that at this point, it is conducting a very successful toxicology study back in the 1960s to the modern day standards of GLP. So it's not reproducing any toxicology. There is no concerns over the toxicology. It's more going forward when we submit to the FDA for the NDA for registration. All preclinical studies need to be done to GLP standards, and people who know involved in the industry would know that, and so therefore it's not recreating or having to redo, or there's any question marks over the toxicology. Toxicology results were completely fine back in 1960. We expect them to be exactly the same fine in this case, but redoing it to GLP standards is an important requirement for modern day registration, and people who know and work within the industry accept that point. It's people who don't have the experience in the industry who think that that is an additional step that has to be taken, but it's not. So in terms of the pre-IND meeting, we've reported on that, everything that we had from the meeting. I'll come back to the trial size in a minute because that's a question I have. And we are currently aiming for Q4 calendar year 2020 to submit our IND with the FDA. So that is going to be a major milestone. And as I said, the clinical trial program is going to be using WOMAC change from baseline as our primary endpoint. We also have another program which I haven't mentioned anything about. This is a second tier program for us. So our primary indication is osteoarthritis. The secondary indication is mucopolysaccharidosis, which is abbreviated to MPS. And we have this month a joint parallel scientific advice submission to the FDA and EMA, looking to harmonise the protocols because this will be a global study covering MPS patients in the US and in Europe. Late 2020, we hope to commence a multi-centre phase 2/3 registration study for the orphan indication under the US repurposed drug guidelines, which is 505(b)(2). And Q3, we hope to commence a phase 2 double-blind clinical study investigating MPS in the role of MPS type 1. So that will be a study conducted in Australia at one of the internationally recognised MPS centres in the world, which is the Women's and Children's Hospital in Adelaide. Professor John Hopwood, who discovered the sequence of the missing gene and cloned that gene and really gave life to enzyme replacement therapy as we know it, was treating people at the Women's and Children's Hospital. So they have an international reputation within the MPS community. The investigators there are very excited about the potential of PPS, and they have already spoken to MPS patients and the carers. As clinicians, they want to do this trial, and so we're very excited to be working with them to get that trial up and running in this year, calendar year 2020. Another question is about the TGA provisional approval. We do hope to make a submission. This is a stage 2 submission to the TGA in Q4 calendar year 2020. And this submission, if successful, and so it is subject to TGA approval, but if successful, would provide Paradigm with the potential to start selling PPS for treatment of osteoarthritis within Australia. And just to clarify, the number of people in Australia who have clinically diagnosed osteoarthritis is over 3 million patients. These are patients who would be in the category of Kellgren-Lawrence grade 2 to 3 or 2 to 4, and therefore we would have data on those subjects, and we are looking obviously very much forward to seeing that provisional approval, allowing us to then demonstrate how quickly the product would be taken up in the market. We would hope to see over the first couple of years moving from 0 through to 20% market penetration at a cost of around about $2,500 per 12 injections, netting revenue for the company in the hundreds of millions of dollars, if not over $1 billion in revenue. Now, I know that might sound like a forecast. It's not. It's just an estimate of the size of the market to give people an idea of the potential of this particular product. Also, we have other additional news flows for the year. We hope to be included into the ASX 300 once they get the dates for the rebalance organised, which we expect to be in June 2020. Looking forward to 2021, we hope to have the pivotal study for MPS read out within that time frame, MPS partnering discussions, and of course the commencement of the phase 3 clinical trials for osteoarthritis. They'll be major milestones early calendar year 2021. And looking forward to calendar year 2022, we'll have the osteoarthritis phase 3 trial complete and read out in Q3 2022. So coming back to the question in terms of the additional numbers. So just for background for people, with regards to the FDA, it is an absolute requirement that any new drug that goes through the IND process must have a minimum of 2 phase 3 clinical studies that are adequately sized and are controlled through an inactive or active placebo. So it is a requirement to do 2 trials. However, there is an exception to that rule. Under the TGA's own regulatory pathway, which is called a 505(b)(2 pathway for drugs that are repurposed, where you can bridge to the safety of the drug from pharmacovigilance reports from other companies, or you can bridge to the drug master file from the originator of the drug, etc., or you can bridge to their toxicology studies, etc. Then what it means is that you can also apply to the agency to do 1 phase 3 clinical study and use the established literature from independent third parties who've also done studies on the drug to show its efficacy. And so therefore, the 1 phase 3 plus the confirmatory study being based on the literature. Now that is up to the agency to determine if that literature provides them with enough information in relation to the phase 3 efficacy. Now, that is independent third-party work. That is not Paradigm's work. It's not Paradigm's data. It is somebody else doing a study, and it's up to that independent third-party work to show whether or not that drug has worked in those conditions, and they've got the right protocol, and they've got the right subject numbers, etc., etc. But that's up to independent third parties. In our case, we've referred to a whole host of work that's been done by independent third parties, and the agency's determination was, for their own internal reasons, that the literature didn't support not doing a second phase 3 clinical study. So that's why we have a situation where we are, that part of the feedback was that the agency didn't accept the literature argument and wanted a second phase 3 clinical study. Nothing to do with Paradigm's data. Let me make that point very clear. Nothing to do with Paradigm's data. All to do with the data from independent third parties didn't meet the agency's criteria. So again, if people are suggesting that there was something in Paradigm's data that is not the case, Paradigm's data stood alone and has formed the basis of going forward to a phase 3 clinical trial. So going forward into a second trial obviously creates the situation where our costs go up, and therefore create the situation for us to raise capital now or raise capital at a later time point and fund the additional phase 3 trial, which is estimated to be sample size of around about 400 subjects. So the Paradigm board has taken this scenario, looked at the situations, taken advice from our equity capital managers at Bell Potter, and looked at a whole range of other forecasts in terms of market conditions and the likelihood of being able to raise capital in 12 months' time when we start the second phase 3 clinical study. So taking into account a whole range of different scenarios, the Paradigm board discussed the possibility of reaching out to some of our institutional shareholders and asking them, if we were to do a capital raise, would they be interested in supporting the company, given that we've got this situation of additional funding for 400 subjects. And we're very pleased to see that the institutional investors were very excited with the information that we've shared with them, as I've shared with you this morning about the background to the FDA, all the positive things that have come from that in terms of the clarity and the certainty, and also some of the rationale in terms of some of the other important commercial considerations, such as commercial or competitor-free run at the market post-registration, given the uniqueness of the Beno material, etc., etc. So the decision to raise the capital was made we raised the capital from institutional investors, and we now are fully funded to conduct the 2 phase 3 clinical trials. So for all of those institutional funds that have come into this capital raise, I know the Paradigm board would again like to thank you for your support and your involvement in this particular capital raise, allowing the company to come out of the trading halt and say that yes, we have to do the second phase 3 clinical trial, but at the same time we're now fully funded to do that. So we've taken off what could have been a potential overhang on the share price. Once the recovery in the market becomes solid, we hope that Paradigm will re-rate substantially, because we're now a company that is fully funded with 3 pivotal studies in the near term. So a study on MPS, 2 studies in osteoarthritis. So given that, I just wanted to explain the rationale as to how that additional trial came up. It's not to do with the Paradigm data. It's to do with us trying to present to the agency our phase 3 plans, being 1 phase 3 and 1 physical phase 3 and the second phase 3 from literature, which wasn't accepted by the FDA, and the FDA has now suggested we do these 2 trials. The good news, though, out of this doing the second trial, is that the trial will serve as a registration trial for Europe as well. So we have the situation where we can now extend the data from this particular trial and have some of the trial centres of the second trial in Europe, and therefore look to use both trials for registration in the US and in Europe. But the really impressive news, I think, is that the 2 trials can be run concurrently. So even though we were expecting to finish our phase 3 trial around Q3 calendar year 2022, by running the 2 trials concurrently, we can still finish the 2 phase 3 trials at the same time as our original plan of Q3 calendar year 2022. So that gives us a significant position in that it doesn't affect our potential times to registration and therefore to revenue in the United States. It just created a funding gap, but all else remains the same. So we're very pleased to report now that funding gap has been filled through an institutional placement, and the institutions that supported us came from the United States, also in Asia, and also a number of the large Australian institutional funds. So we're very, very pleased to report that funding gap has been removed in terms of a potential overhang. We're now fully funded, and we have certainty around the phase 3 endpoints. We have a lot of data to support where we're heading in terms of our trials going forward. So all in all, I think it's a great outcome for the company. And just looking through some of the questions in the last few minutes, are there safety concerns from the FDA, any adverse events? Are there specific requests or requirements on that front, and how they're being addressed? There's no specific concerns from the agency. As I mentioned, I think the agency was quite impressed with our phase 2 data. There's nothing there that we have to say that is a major specific issue. Questions around the BNA exclusivity. Are we sure that we've got a solid agreement in place with BNA Pharma? I'm very confident we've got a very solid agreement in place with BNA Pharma, but also importantly, we also have a very solid commercial relationship with BNA Pharma, such that any matters that arise, we can sit down and talk to them at any time. BNA Pharma are absolutely delighted with the progress that Paradigm is making, so they are a very long-term supporter of the company. So I think I answered most of the questions here. Trial costs, cost breakdown. I think I've covered that in terms of the first trial being 750 subjects, the second being 400, created a funding gap of around about $35 million, which we've now covered through the capital raise, which will be announced this morning. Drug registration. There's a strange question. Can doctors send their patients to veterinary surgeons to get pentazan polysulfate? I don't think I've ever suggested that is possible, but it's a reference to some people publishing that people can go to their vet to get pentazan polysulfate. I think if people understood the rules and regulations around drugs for human use and drugs for veterinary use, I think they would clearly understand that that is a non-issue. But of course, people could always, when they go to their GP next time, ask their doctor to prescribe them a veterinary drug and see what response they get. But I think that's one of these things that comes from perhaps people not fully understanding the rules and regulations around veterinary drugs and human drugs. But to answer the question, that would not occur, and I think people would understand that the doctor and the vet would be in very serious breach of their rules and regulations if they were to go down that path. It would have serious consequences. But no, it's not going to happen. And I think that's the end of my questions, and I know we're right on 9 o'clock. Again, could I just come back to the fact that we had a very successful meeting with the FDA, which provided a huge amount of clarity and certainty for the company going forward. And in this business where there's lots of moving parts, having that clarity and certainty is absolute gold for a pharmaceutical company. So we couldn't be happier with the guidance that we've got from the agency. We are now fully funded to execute on the 2 phase 3 clinical trials. We will aim to run them concurrently and have all of the data from the 2 trials coming off Q3 calendar year 2022. So it is not a long time away from having the outcomes for the phase 3 clinical studies. Could I also just say that osteoarthritis is a massive market with a major unmet medical need, and Paradigm is now well positioned to be front and centre in terms of potential new therapy for this indication and for this market. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank all of my Paradigm colleagues who've worked extremely hard to get us in this position. We have been able to do this on a capital preservation mode of operation, meaning that we use our capital or investors' capital very, very wisely. We make sure that all of the spend is highly concentrated into one of 2 or 3 clinical programs, which are subject to R&D tax rebate. So we currently have around about $74 million in the bank. Bear in mind, it was 12 months ago that we raised $77 million, to give you an example. And in that time, we have finished a number of phase 2 clinical trials. So we are, again, moving forward with our plans to execute things very quickly and also very cost effectively. But I would like to, on behalf of the Paradigm board and all the staff, thank all of the institutional investors who've come into this particular raise. We had to do it very quickly. We didn't want to leave the offer open and exposed to market conditions, which are extremely volatile at the moment. So we didn't include a SPP in this capital raise. We went with a institutional raise to execute quickly and come out of this trading halt with the funds in the bank to remove the overhang of a potential further capital raise down the track, and therefore allow the stock to re-rate on the basis that we are moving quickly to 2 phase 3 clinical trials and we do have the cash in the bank to execute on those plans. So thanks to all of the current and new institutions who came into the raise. Our share register is now looking extremely robust. We have approximately 22 new institutions on our books, and some are heading towards 3 or 4% of the capital of the company, and we hope that post this raise that there'll be strong aftermarket support, and we hope that we will be able to have support of all of our investors in the company, knowing that we're moving forward very quickly, and also looking forward to particularly some very exciting news flow around the NFL pass players, confirmation of further special access data. We currently have 34 subjects we've released data on. We hope by Q3 that we'll be releasing data on over 100 special access cases. Things are moving very quickly at Paradigm, so continue to watch the developments. And again, thank you to everyone who's participated in the call this morning. It's much appreciated, and I'll let everyone get on with their day. And if there are any further questions, please come back to Simon White, who's our Director of Investor Relations, or back to myself. But we look forward to continuing to do our very best for all shareholders and making sure that we execute the plans very cost effectively and very quickly. So thank you very much.